the beginning of June this year, I found in my wood stock a very large lump of monkey puzzle. Now, I decided to trim it up the best I could, then to mount it on the lathe with a view to turning a very large bowl. Now, even after trimming it up, at the time I considered it was too big to mount on the lathe and threw it back in the wood pile. So today I picked up the piece of wood again, needing a good anniversary present for some dear friends. Now I want to get this as true as practicable before I mount it on the lathe, so the first thing to do is to trim it on the bandsaw. Now, monkey puzzle is a member of the pine family of trees and a very close relative of the Norfolk Island Pine in the US. It's a very soft wood indeed, and therefore has to be very securely anchored to the faceplate, especially in the end grain orientation. So I'm going to use the biggest faceplate I have available at the moment and anchor it using 10 3-inch screws. Now I'm going to be turning this bowl off board, having swung the headstock through 180 degrees. Now this particular faceplate is fitted with 2 grub screws, which I'm going to tighten for extra security. Spend the next few minutes just getting everything set up. It seems to be running sweet at about 286 at the moment, which is a fine to start with. I can increase speed as the balance improves. Lastly, positioning the banjo the right way round on the lathe bed extension. Now, as far as tools go, I'm going to try and do at least as much of this as practicable using my very trusted Robert Sorby 1/2-inch bowl gouge. Now, the lathe is spinning about 300 RPM at the moment, and it's surprisingly stable. Now, although this lump of monkey puzzle is quite large, it's not very dense and it's over seasoned. Now, I've turned monkey puzzle before, and one of the interesting challenges with it is the difference in density between the knots and the rest of the timber. The knots are very much denser and it produces a consistent knocking noise all the time. Also, and quite typical of monkey puzzle, is that the pith has completely rotted out. Now I'm going to deal with this void by mixing up some wood turnings and some shavings, some dust, with some 30-minute epoxy resin to make a gooey, gloopy paste and fill it that way. Now, I've never actually tried this before, but it would seem to me at least that it would be a more natural filling rather than using coloured resin. So once I've got the hole filled and a bit of Gorilla Tape to cover the bottom, I'm going to turn it over and tamp the filling back down to the base. Having screwed the faceplate to the base and reattached it to the lathe, I've now got to think about hollowing this behemoth. I'll do as much as I can with my trusty Sorby 1/2-inch bowl gouge. Now, the centre where the pith rotted out is extremely punky indeed, and the difference in hardness of the wood is going to become more pronounced when I start to hit the knots in a minute. So just for a change, I switch over to my Simon Hope 6mm hollowing tool for a few minutes. Now, once I start to hit the knots, I switched over to my Glen Teagle carbide cutter, which seemed to make a good job of this. As long as I hold the tool about 15 degrees, I seem to be getting a better cut than I have with any other tool, and fortunately the punkiness in the centre seems to be dissipating somewhat. Now there's a little punkiness still around the centre, around where the pith was, and I've got to find a way of stiffening this up a little bit. Now all kinds of options have been wandering through my mind while I've been finishing off the hollowing out, including giving it a good soaking cactus juice and putting it into a vacuum bag. However, I've decided it's not that bad, and I'm going to try using copious quantities of Martin Sabin-Smith's pre-thinned sanding sealer. Now this very soft punky wood has absorbed lots of this, in fact about 200 mils. So while it dries, I'm going to take the opportunity to fill 2 voids on the outside with some 5-minute epoxy. Now, having left that to cure and to harden overnight, I'm now able to do a nice finishing cut with my freshly sharpened big fat scraper. Now, I can see some people are going to think that using sanding sealer as a wood stiffener is a very expensive option, but in fact it's much cheaper than cactus juice, for example. Bowl seems to have developed all by itself an odd shaped rim, and at the moment I'm in 2 minds whether or not to turn it off or leave it. So I decide to leave it for the time being, with the intention of adding a very thin black line at the delineation point. If I don't like it, I can always turn it off and keep a conventional rim. So in order to deal with a few punky spots on the outside of the bowl, I decided to give it the same treatment as the inside and give it a copious dousing in pre-thinned sanding sealer. Moving on to the only aspect of wood turning I don't like, and that is abrasive work. I'm going all the way through the grits, starting with 120 down to 400. Once I've finished the heavy abrasives with the roll-lock attachment, I move across to my Simon Hope system to finish it off, going down to 400 grit. The 1.5 hours spent sanding this particular item almost drove me to thirsty ferret. Having managed to resist this, I decided to press ahead with the sanding sealer. Now I ended up applying 4 coats of Hampshire Sheen pre-thinned sanding sealer, denibbing in between, before I got to the stage where I was happy to proceed to Yorkshire grit. Once I finished with the Yorkshire grit, I moved over to Yorkshire grit microfine and then Hampshire Sheen high gloss. So I achieved a more than adequate finish on this. I dismounted it from the faceplate and mounted it on the Longworth chuck in order to finish the base. Okay, well that's that project finished. One very large monkey puzzle bowl, which is 12 inches in diameter and almost 8 inches tall. I can't believe that the byproducts from this entirely filled my quite large wood dust and shavings box. Very pleased with the outcome. Monkey puzzle isn't the easiest wood in the world to turn, given the difference between the soft timber and the very, very hard knots. Also, it's very easy to oversand monkey puzzle, which will leave a very uneven surface. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this bowl is in fact a present from my good friends Sandy and Alan, who are celebrating 35 years of wedded bliss together this Saturday. Now, I myself have been married for over 40 years. Hang on a minute. No, you haven't. Not at least to the same woman. Yes, but if you add it all together, it still counts and it's more than 40, right? Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next week.